Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out at the range talking about the 308. It's a very popular rifle caliber here in the United States, but the question has come up before in conversations elsewhere. Is the 308 really relevant anymore? Is it obsolete, or is there still a place for the 308 in the military, in hunting realms, and target shooting realms? And that's something we're going to talk about a little bit this afternoon in this video. But before we get started with this video, guys, if you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms channel in the age of demonetization, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. There's a link in the video description below. Also, if you enjoy the content that we produce here at the Military Arms channel, please take a moment to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Also hit that notification bell so you'll be notified when we post new videos. With all that being said, let's get started with today's video and discuss whether or not the 308 still has a place in history going forward. During World War II, the United States was primarily using a 30-06 cartridge, and the 30-06 would have been fired either out of the 1903 Springfield bolt-action rifle or the M1 Garand. And yes, I know his last name was pronounced Garand, but the U.S. military called it the Garand, so it's good enough for me. And so the 30-06 served our nation well. We used it in machine guns and we used it in shoulder-fired weapons, much like the BAR, the M1 Garand, the 1919, weapons like that. But we saw something come about during World War II, primarily out of Nazi Germany, and that was the invention of the STG-44. And the STG-44 used an intermediate cartridge, so the 30-06 would have been a full power cartridge. The intermediate cartridge, the 8mm Kurz, was used in the STG-44. Now, the STG-44 came after the Fedorov that was developed in Russia, but most people attribute the STG-44 for being the first modern assault rifle. And yes, that's a real word. It's assault weapon that is a made-up term. And so the U.S. military took a look at that, as the world's militaries did after the war, and they thought, the Germans were on to something with this. We need to shorten our cartridges and make them more capable in terms of being lightweight, reducing the weight of the cartridge itself and the rifles that fired them, and also being able to use select fire capability, so you'd have semi-automatic or fully automatic fire modes available to you, thus making it an assault rifle. The Germans called it the Sturmgewehr or storm rifle during World War II. So the U.S., now here's a 7.62x39. I don't have an 8mm Kurz cartridge here to show you, but the 7.62x39 is very similar, and it has a 30 caliber bullet that's in a much shorter case. And this is something that the Russians would develop in the 1940s. The United States military, however, took the 30-06 and they did shorten it, looking for that intermediate cartridge, but they came up with what we know as a 7.62x51 NATO or 308. There's slight pressure differences between the two, but that's not what this video is about. I'll just call it 308 for the purposes of this video. So the 308 Winchester was a shortened version of the 30-06, and it did allow for the U.S. military to manufacture and adopt a rifle that would be more like an assault rifle, but wasn't truly an assault rifle. And there's a whole story about the adoption of the M14. That's a very interesting story, but for today's purposes, it's not really relevant to the discussion, so I'm not going to get into it. But the U.S. military would adopt the M14, which would have a detachable magazine, a concept used in this STG-44, and it would originally be fired out of the M14, which was a select fire weapon by design. Now, later on, the select fire capability would more often be disabled in the guns because the gun was really quite uncontrollable unless you were very experienced in using the weapon. But it did have select fire capability, so the United States was trying to get there, but we kind of fell flat on our face in the process. It wouldn't be very long before the U.S. military would adopt a true intermediate cartridge in the 5.56x45mm. This is basically a high-powered .22. It's a true intermediate cartridge. And this is something that the media oftentimes gets very wrong in this discussion. They'll call the AR-15 a high-powered rifle. It is not a high-powered rifle by any measure. It's an intermediate-powered rifle. Now, even though the 308 probably was intended to be an intermediate cartridge, by today's standards, most people would consider 308 to be a high-powered rifle cartridge. And then again, we would have other calibers that would, or cartridges that would be developed, like the 5.56, that would be that true intermediate cartridge. So, is the 308 7.62x51 NATO obsolete? And I want to talk about its use both in military terms and also in hunting terms, and even in target shooting and plinking terms, and maybe a little bit in terms of self-defense. So let's talk about that next. If you guys haven't checked out Primary Arms online, please swing by and check out their website. They have all sorts of inventory that ranges from firearms to accessories, really good prices, fast shipping, outstanding customer support. If you use the code MAC and you purchase a PA branded optic or red dot sight with a magnified optic, you'll get a free scope mount with that MAC code. Or if you pick up a red dot sight or a prism sight, you'll get a free kill flash anti-reflective device. So please check out primaryarms.com. When the military adopts a cartridge, there's a good chance that civilians will adopt that cartridge too here in the United States. And the 308 was no different. So the M14 is one of the shortest lived military service rifles as a primary issue infantry rifle. Yes, I know it was still used up into the War on Terror, but that was out of necessity, not out of wanting to use M14s and things like that. That was just pulling stuff out of mothballs because we had to shoot further and a 5.56 wasn't cutting it. But the M14 was retired from military service as a primary issued infantry rifle relatively quickly because really the 308 was not going to live up to the intermediate cartridge system that the world's militaries were looking to adopt. And so very quickly, the United States found itself, after the Korean War, found itself involved in the Vietnam conflict, and we needed to figure out how to move forward because our soldiers were going up against an enemy that were armed with true assault rifles. And so the M14 just wasn't cutting it very well. And that led to the development of the M16. The 308 just didn't last long in military service, but it would continue on in military service in the role of a general purpose machine gun like the M60 and later the 240 Bravo and Lima and stuff like that. But for whatever reason, even though it was short-lived as the primary infantry rifle cartridge, it caught on like wildfire in the United States. And so it became a very popular deer cartridge. It became a very popular precision cartridge and a long-range shooting cartridge. And that lasted up until the 2000s when we started looking at more modern versions of cartridges that would fit in a similar type of action. In front of me, I have a Daniel Defense DD5 V3. This is chambered in 308. And the AR-10 was part of those military trials that the M14 won, and the AR-10 originally was chambered in 308. And the DD5 V3 is a modern version of that AR-10. Supremely accurate rifle, but we start to run into the limitations of the 308 cartridge when we start talking about extended ranges. Because past 5, 6, 7, 800 yards, that 308 bullet is going to start getting pushed around quite a bit by the wind, where a more efficient or a bullet that has a higher ballistic coefficient, a more aerodynamic bullet, is not going to be as influenced by those wind conditions. And so that's one of the areas where the 308 started to come up short, and people started looking for solutions. One that really took off was the 6.5 Creedmoor. So you can see the Creedmoor next to the 308, 308 being right here, and this would be the 6.5 Creedmoor. The Creedmoor has a similar overall length, but it's shooting a 6.5 bullet versus a 7.62 bullet. And the 6.5 bullet itself is inherently going to have a higher ballistic coefficient and be better at extended ranges. And so the 6.5 Creedmoor started off as kind of a boutique cartridge. People were trash talking it, like, I'll just keep my 308. And now where we sit in 2021, the U.S. military is using 6.5 Creedmoor in belt-fed machine guns and sniper rifles and things like that. The U.S. military is looking now of moving away from the 5.56 for reasons we won't get into in this video, but they're moving away from the 5.56 and looking at 6.8 by 51, which is similar to this in that this is a 7.62 by 51, but we're going to a smaller bullet, not quite a small 6.5, but the military is already looking past the 308 or 7.62 by 51 NATO. And that happened fairly quickly with the War on Terror. We were looking for a solution to get better performance downrange, better performance than the 308 could offer. And again, that's where the 6.5 Creedmoor came up. Now, the 6.5 Creedmoor, if I'm not mistaken, was originally developed in bolt-action rifles and then migrated ultimately into gas guns or self-loading rifles, much like this POF. Now, the Daniel Defense is a direct gas impingement rifle. So is this POF. This is the POF Revolution in 6.5. Our friends at Classic Firearms sent this rifle over to us. We will be doing a video on this rifle separately. Now, this is an extreme example of the AR-10 evolving, but the point being that the magazine is the same for the 308 and the 6.5 Creedmoor. So the 6.5 Creedmoor fitting into 308 magazines and having the benefit of working with 308 bolts, it was a very easy transition for self-loading rifles to pick up that 6.5 Creedmoor. And so that's why you're seeing the military looking at the 6.5 Creedmoor for a number of different reasons. But first of all, it has better velocity, or not better velocity, but a better round at range, delivering accurate aim fired at range. It has lower recoil than the 308 and a number of different advantages. And so now we're seeing rifles like this and bolt guns popping up, and the 6.5 Creedmoor has become quite mainstream. Just 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was ridiculed for liking the 6.5 Creedmoor. Today, the military is actually looking at it. It has gained wide acceptance. When I walk into gun stores, I'll find just as much 6.5 Creedmoor on the shelf as I will 308 in most cases. I will admit right now, I'm a 6.5 Creedmoor fan, so I am biased towards the 6.5 Creedmoor, but let's try to be as objective as we possibly can here. Now, I'm going to primarily talk about long-range shooting, not necessarily hunting. I could go off in the weeds and talk about all the different applications and how cartridges are used, but let's talk about long-range performance, because a lot of folks are looking at building or buying a long-range capable rifle because target shooting at distance has become quite popular in the United States. So when looking at the 308, I've chosen, for this purposes of this discussion, the Federal Gold Medal Match 175 grain SMK. It's a Sierra Match King bullet. And then over here I have a 140 grain Hornady ELD round, and both of these bullet weights are very commonly used for long-range precision shooting. You can get different bullet weights for different applications. If you're going to use hunting or varminting, there's different bullet weights for both cartridges that would be better suited for those purposes. Again, we're talking about long-range performance here and ballistic coefficients and things like that. So first of all, the rifles that we've chosen for today's discussion primarily are the Daniel Defense DD5 V3 with a 16-inch barrel, and the POF Revolution in 6.5 Creedmoor with an 18-inch barrel. When you get into long-range shooting, you typically, and even with 308, but typically the longer barrel is going to give you better ballistics that you're looking for. The ballistic coefficient is tied to that bullet velocity. But the 6.5 Creedmoor, in my opinion, is more barrel sensitive in terms of barrel length and its performance. So you definitely want to have a slightly longer barrel with a 6.5 Creedmoor to maximize its advantages that it has over the 308. If you start trimming that barrel back too much, you start to give up the advantage that the 6.5 Creedmoor has in terms of ballistics. So that's something that you have to weigh very carefully. A lot of folks are shooting shorter barreled rifles, especially bolt actions, and even in gas guns. It's become something of a trend lately, and you'll see 18 and 16-inch barreled guns being used at extended ranges, both in the 308 and 6.5 Creedmoor. Matter of fact, one of the things I've seen being discussed quite a bit on the internet is 14.5-inch barrels in 308 versus 6.5 Creedmoor. Okay, so let's talk about the performance of the Federal Gold Medal Match round out of the Daniel Defense with its 16-inch barrel. So we actually measured the velocity of that using our lab radar, and we got a velocity of 2,380 feet per second. That calculates out to 2,201 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. All right, so this is where we get into ballistics and ballistic coefficients. So the 175 grain SMK has a G1 ballistic coefficient of 0.505. That's a good ballistic coefficient for the 308, but there are cartridges out there like the 6.5 Creedmoor that push that up considerably higher. And with a ballistic coefficient comes less bullet drop. The bullet's going to retain its velocity longer, and therefore it's going to shoot a little bit more flat, is commonly used. And it's going to retain its energy at range, where the 308 being less aerodynamic, and I'm speaking in general terms here. I know people are going to get into minutia in the comment section, but I'm trying to speak in layman's terms. The 308 being less aerodynamic is going to shed its velocity, and therefore is going to become more of an indirect fire weapon, where the 6.5 Creedmoor is going to be more of a direct fire weapon. The 308 at distance is going to have more bullet drop than the 6.5 Creedmoor. And a lot of that, again, goes back to its ballistic performance or ballistic coefficients. So let's talk about the 6.5 Creedmoor out of the 18-inch barrel of the POF. Now, the Hornady round clocked at 2,635 feet per second with 2,159 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. So yes, the 308 edges out the 6.5 Creedmoor out of the two rifles and cartridges we've selected for today's discussion at the muzzle. Where you start to see the difference is at range because of its higher ballistic coefficient. In this case, the Hornady round has a ballistic coefficient, a G1 of 0.646. That is significantly higher than the 308. Keep in mind that ballistic coefficients are based heavily on velocity as well. So as that bullet slows down, the ballistic coefficient starts to drop along with that velocity. But that 6.5 Creedmoor is going to have considerably less bullet drop at range, and because of its higher BC, it's going to be less affected by wind. So the wind isn't going to be as likely to push it as far off target. And so that's where the 6.5 Creedmoor really starts to shine. Some of the other advantages of the 6.5 Creedmoor over the 308 would include, first of all, better long-range performance, lighter recoil. There's considerably less recoil out of a 6.5 Creedmoor than a 308. When we were shooting the Q-Fix and the Sig Cross, the 308 versions of those rifles are quite punishing if you shoot them a lot versus the 6.5 Creedmoors, which were much more pleasant and something you could shoot all day. Then you have the advantage of the 6.5 Creedmoor of using the same magazines as the 308 and also using the same bolt as a 308. So if you have an MDR or a Desert Tech bolt action rifle or some other rifle that allows you to readily change your barrel very easily yourself, you can go from 308 to 6.5 Creedmoor with a simple barrel swap. You can use the same magazine and bolt. So the 6.5 Creedmoor has that advantage. So at range, it's going to perform better. There's just no argument about it. It's going to deliver more energy at range than the 308. It's going to give you better performance in terms of wind drift and bullet drop than the 308. It has the advantage of using the same magazine, bolts, and so making that jump over to 6.5 Creedmoor is actually quite simple. So that's at least part of the reasons why you're seeing so many people adopting the 6.5 Creedmoor, up to and including the military. In the end, do I think the 308 still has an application for hunting, long-range shooting, general fun, self-defense, things like that? Absolutely. It's not an obsolete cartridge. The 308 is going to be around for a lot longer than me or you. It's going to be a very popular cartridge going forward. But that doesn't take away from the fact that technology advances and sometimes you just have to get out of your comfort zone. It's comfortable to stay shooting the 308 because you know it, you trust it, you've been shooting it for most of your life. I was that way when I first learned of the 6.5 Creedmoor before it was offered in factory loads, when it was still a wildcat, if you will, you had to hand load for it. I had very little interest in it, but the minute they offered a factory load for it, that's when I went out and bought one and decided I'm going to learn something about this cartridge. And ultimately, I very quickly came to the conclusion that the 6.5 Creedmoor was superior to the 308 for what I would use it for. And that's what's key. You have to decide what's going to work for you. But I do recommend you step outside of that comfort zone every once in a while and test out some of those new flavors. You may wind up liking them. I'm a huge 6.5 convert. I want everything in 6.5 Creedmoor now. I still enjoy shooting 308. I love shooting the classics in 308, and I would still deer hunt or just hunt in general with 308. But it's not my favorite cartridge. If I have to pick a cartridge, it's going to be 6.5 Creedmoor if I was given a binary choice between the two. So only you can make that decision. But you're also going to notice that over here we have the 5.56 by 45, the 7.62 by 39, and here we have the 6.5 Grendel. The 6.5 Grendel is kind of changing the game in terms of intermediate cartridges. The same technology that's being used in 308 versus 6.5 Creedmoor is also being used in the intermediate cartridges, which would be a video down the road in a separate discussion. All right, guys, I look forward to the comments down below. If you guys would like to support us here at the Military Arms channel, the best way to do that is to become a Patreon supporter. There's a link in the video description below. You get early access to videos like this one. You have direct access to me. I answer all private communications and all sorts of good stuff going on over there. Again, link down below. Also, right here on YouTube, you've got that little join button underneath the video player you're watching right now. Click that join button and consider supporting us here on YouTube. And last but not least, guys, please swing by and check out coppercustom.com. Thank you for 13 years of support. We'll talk to you guys soon.